New York State Rep. Zohran Mamdani confronts Vice President JD Vance in a heated post-primary debate. Expect fireworks as Zohran tries to grandstand on live TV, but JD Vance doesn't hold back within seconds. The crowd is stunned by Vance's sharp response. Watch how one viral sentence flipped the entire conversation and left Mamdani speechless. The country was still buzzing after Zohran Mamdani's shocking win in the New York City Democratic mayoral primary barely hours after the results came in. Mamdani, known for his radical views, took to social media with a bold challenge. JD Vance, you and your boss Trump are destroying this country. Debate me live. If you're not too scared, it didn't take long for Vice President JD Vance to respond. Calm, composed, and direct, he simply posted, "Happy to, let's give the American people clarity." The debate was scheduled within 24 hours. Networks across the nation cleared primetime slots. The stage was set in Manhattan. Millions tuned in expecting a war of words, but no one could predict what would happen next. Mammy walked onto the stage. Like a boxer entering a ring, fiery eyes clenched fists. Vance, on the other hand, walked in, silently adjusting his mic, nodding at the audience. Then the countdown began. 3, 2, 1, the cameras went live. The moderator barely finished the welcome before Mamdani leaned forward and delivered the first blow. "JD Vance, you're nothing but Trump's lapdog. I'm here to end your lies tonight," the crowd gasped. JD Vance didn't flinch. He simply tilted his head almost like a teacher waiting for a child. To finish a tantrum, the moderator tried to intervene, but Mamdani waved him off. "You call yourself vice president?" Mamdani said, voice rising, "But you serve a man who fuels division. Me? I'm here to unite, to fix this broken city, starting by abolishing your corrupt systems." The crowd was stunned. He went on listing his agenda with pride. No more NYPD, no more prisons, no more ICE raids, no more guns, no more cash bail. I'll legalize sex work, open safe drug sites because New Yorkers deserve freedom. Cameras zoomed in on Vance. He still hadn't spoken a word. "You're afraid of ideas?" "JD, because ideas threaten the small box you and Trump live in." Then finally Vance leaned forward, his voice steady and low. "Zohran, I came here tonight to debate ideas, not madness. You want to liberate this city by turning it into a playground for crime, chaos, and collapse." A pin could be heard dropping. "And tonight I'm going to show America who you really are." The audience fell completely silent. JD Vance reached into his jacket and pulled out a single sheet of paper calmly. He held it up. "This," he said, "is a leaked internal memo from your campaign outlining plans to end all cooperation with ICE and immediately halt all prison sentences, even for violent offenders." Gasps echoed through the studio. Mamdani's face twitched. "Vance didn't stop. You talk about freedom, but what about the freedom of a mother walking her child home from school without fear of an addict waving a needle on the sidewalk?" He looked directly at the camera. "Zohran, you don't want to lead New York. You want to dismantle it brick by brick. You want to turn this city into a lawless experiment fueled by fantasies and foreign ideologies that don't belong here." Then came the moment that would go viral worldwide. "You're not running to be mayor of New York. You're running to be the mayor of mayhem." The crowd erupted. Some stood, some cried. Mamdani's face drained of color. He tried to speak. He couldn't. Vance turned slightly to the audience and added softly, "And tonight, I brought the receipts." The room was never the same again. For a moment the studio was frozen in time. JD Vance's words, "You're not running to be mayor of New York, you're running to be the mayor of mayhem," were still echoing through the room. Zohran Mamdani stared straight ahead, lips slightly parted, trying to grasp the blow he'd just received. His confidence had cracked. Then came the ripple. The crowd began murmuring. Some even applauded. A few journalists started typing frantically. Phones lit up. Twitter was already ablaze, but Vance wasn't finished. "You call me a servant, at least. I serve the American people. You, Zohran, serve something else, something darker." Mamdani shifted in his seat. "Let's not forget." Vance continued, lifting another sheet. "You once tweeted that prisons should be erased from the map, that law enforcement is a tool of white supremacy. Is that what you'll tell a grieving mother whose son was stabbed on a subway train last week?" A woman in the front row suddenly broke into tears. Her son had been murdered just 2 weeks ago, and that was the first moment in the debate when people began to feel the real cost of Mamdani's promises. JD Vance now had full control of the room. His tone never rose. He wasn't loud. He was surgical. "Zohran, You say you want to help the poor, but let's be honest with the people tonight. He reached into his folder again, cameras zoomed in Vance, held up documents, highlighted bank records, campaign filings, and foreign donations. Your campaign accepted over $400,000. From foreign link PACs, you called them solidarity contributions, but do New Yorkers know those funds came through shadow organizations based in Uganda, Qatar, and a firm flagged by DHS for radical activities? Mamdani stood up suddenly, his mic catching a sharp intake of breath. This is slander, he snapped, but Vance didn't even blink. Then explain it right now. Tell these good people why your campaign finance record reads like a criminal case file. The crowd didn't cheer, they didn't boo, they just stared silent, processing then. Vance looked straight into the camera. New York deserves a mayor who will protect its people, not someone who wants to burn its institutions down and dance in the ashes. Mamdani sat back down for the first time that night. He looked small. The moderator finally stepped in voice. Shaking Representative Mamdani, would you like to respond, Zohran? Leaned forward, but the confidence was gone. His voice was no longer booming, the vice president. He's twisting facts. I believe in change, real change. Yes, I oppose the NYPD, but for justice. I want freedom. He stopped. The audience wasn't buying it then. A man stood in the back row. My daughter overdosed last year thanks to your safe injection site policy. She was 19. Silence. No one moved. Mamdani's eyes dropped to his notes. He didn't respond. He couldn't. Vance didn't speak either. He looked at the grieving father with deep respect, nodded slightly, and said, Sir, I'm sorry for your loss. You didn't deserve that. No family does. And for the first time, viewers across America saw it. JD Vance wasn't just a politician. He was human. He wasn't angry. He was hurting for the nation. And just like that, the tide of the debate changed forever. The moderator looked pale. Producers in the control room were whispering frantically into their earpieces. Even the news anchors covering the debate live on television sat in stunned silence. This wasn't just a political face-off anymore. It was becoming a national moment. Zohran Mamdani cleared his throat. He tried to reclaim the narrative. These are distractions. I'm not here to debate old systems. I'm here to destroy them. And yes, I said I'd abolish the NYPD. It's a corrupt relic. We don't need more prisons. We need more understanding. His words didn't land like before. The room didn't clap. In fact, someone quietly muttered, insane, near the back. JD Vance turned to him calmly. You call that understanding? Let me ask the audience. Would you feel safe walking your children through Central Park at night under Zohran's vision? No cops, no bail, no rules. He paused. And we tried something like that in 2020. You remember the crime spikes? The broken windows, the blood on sidewalks? The audience did remember, and you could feel it. Pain, fear, regret. Manny had awakened something dangerous in New Yorkers, but Vance was awakening their memory from the second row. A woman stood up. She clutched a worn photograph to her chest. Her voice cracked as she spoke. My son Jamal was gunned down in the Bronx 2 years ago. His killer was out on bail under your no-punishment policy, Mr. Mahoney. Gasps filled the air. Zohran froze. You said abolish prisons? The woman continued weeping. But what about justice, my boy? Never made it to college. You never even got to vote. Mamdani's face twitched with panic. I can't speak on individual cases, JD Vance. Rose, he gently took the mother's hand. The camera captured it raw, unfiltered, real, ma'am. I'm sorry what happened to your son. It should have never happened. He turned to Mamdani. This is your legacy, not hope, not progress, pain. You hide behind slogans. While mothers bury their children, even some of Mamdani's supporters looked down. The reality was too much. The tears were too real. This wasn't a debate anymore. This was a reckoning. The debate clock was ticking. Only 15 minutes left. But JD Vance wasn't finished. He reached for one last document sealed in an envelope. Let's end with truth. He held it up. This is a letter from a whistleblower inside. In Zohran's campaign, it outlines plans, if he wins, to redirect city funds toward community justice coalitions, several of which have ties to extremist groups flagged by DHS. He handed it to the moderator. This isn't a conspiracy. This is verified, checked, real. Manny jumped up furious. This is a setup, fabricated garbage. But Vance stood his ground. You said you wanted to run New York, I say? You want to ruin it? Then came the final sentence, the one that would be replayed 1,000,000 times. This city survived 9/11's, hurricanes, blackouts, and pandemics. but it may not survive you. The audience gasped, a few even. Clapped slowly at first, then louder. Mamdani sat face blank, arms limp, and JD Vance simply looked into the camera and said, "New York, vote with your heart, but more importantly, vote with your head." The debate stage felt like a courtroom now, but it wasn't the moderators or the audience or the media judging Zohran Mamdani. It was reality. He tried to force a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. They darted left, right, searching for help, a break. "A lifeline, these are personal attacks," Mamdani blurted. "Cheap shots," but JD Vance stood still, calm, and devastating. "Personal, Zohran? This isn't about you. This is about the city that took you in the same city. You're trying to gut from the inside." He turned to the audience. "He wants to dismantle law enforcement, release criminals, flood the streets with drugs and call it progress. But the only thing he's building," Vance's voice dropped, "is a future where New Yorkers are afraid to walk out their front door." The crowd murmured. A mother clutched her daughter tighter. A man in a delivery uniform shook his head for the first time. Zohran Mamdani looked like someone who regretted showing up tonight. Vance calmly stepped toward his podium and opened a small red folder. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't smile. "This folder contains signed emails and statements from 2 former staffers in your campaign. Both of them left quietly after discovering you were planning to reallocate NYPD emergency response funds to an overseas-linked nonprofit based in Kala." The moderator blinked. "Kala, Uganda?" Vance nodded yes, a group whose leaders have publicly called America a failed experiment and praised Hamas fighters. Zohran's face twisted. "That's not real. That's not." Vance held up a printout, a receipt with his campaign logo and foreign wire details. The audience was now dead silent. "You wanted transparency," Zohran Vance said, eyes cold. "Here it is. You betrayed the very people you claimed to serve. Not for justice, but for your agenda. An anti-American one." Mamdani stared at the document, then at the crowd, then at the cameras. He said nothing because there was nothing left to say. Outside the studio, the streets of Manhattan were filled with flashing phones, tears and gasps, bars, shops, homes. Everyone was watching. Even cab drivers had pulled over inside. JD Vance took a breath. He was tired. You could hear it in his voice, not of debating, but of watching America suffer from people like Zohran. "We need change, yes, but not chaos." He looked into the lens again, this time slower, softer, to every New Yorker who's afraid right now. "I hear you. To every mother who lost a son, to every store owner robbed last night, to every family struggling to feel safe again." You paused, holding back emotion. "You deserve a city that protects you, not one that experiments on you." A woman in the front row stood, then another applause began, not wild, but honest. Mamdani looked smaller than ever. He sat, not speaking, not moving, just absorbing. And JD Vance, he didn't gloat. He simply nodded once, as if to say, "This was never about me." In a quiet corner of the audience, an elderly man stood up. He wasn't dressed fancy. His hands trembled slightly as he held a folded American flag to his chest. "I buried my grandson last year," said, voice soft but heavy. He was walking home. Just walking. A man high on fentanyl stabbed him for $5. The studio went silent. Even the cameramen froze. Zohran said that man shouldn't have been in prison, that drugs are a health crisis and not a crime. JD Vance didn't interrupt. He just listened, his eyes full of quiet sadness. The old man took a shaky breath. "But my boy's gone, you understand? He's gone." Mahoney looked stunned. He hadn't expected this. Real stories, real families, real pain. Vance finally spoke. "Sir, your grandson's life mattered I promise you there are still leaders in this country who will fight to make sure it never happens again." The crowd clapped slowly, then louder, the kind of clapping that carries tears, because, for the first time, it felt like someone in power was actually listening. JD Vance turned back to the moderator. "I want to share something most people don't know." He pulled a letter from his pocket. "It's from a woman named Isabel. She used to support Zohran Mamdani's campaign. She believed in reform until her niece, age 14, was trafficked by a gang that ran a so-called safe sex work site, backed by Zohran's policy advisors." The air turned ice cold. Even Zohran shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Vance read the words slowly. "They called it liberation, but it was a nightmare. We begged for help, but the city said it was decriminalized. They wouldn't stop it." Vance paused and looked up. "Her niece is alive, but she doesn't smile." Anymore, she doesn't sleep, and she doesn't believe anyone in government. Kersey held the letter to his chest. I do. And for a moment, even those who disagreed with Vance felt it. This wasn't politics anymore. This was about pain protection and the kind of leadership that comes from the heart. Zohran Mamdani tried to speak, his voice cracked. You're using grief as a weapon, but the crowd didn't react. They'd seen too much. JD Vance didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look angry. He looked like a man who had nothing left to prove. No. Zohran, you used promises to fool people. I'm just showing them the price of believing. He stepped forward slowly, calmly, knew. York is tired, it's hurting, and tonight they needed truth, not slogans. Mamdani sat down, defeated eyes, unfocused hands shaking. He had never imagined he'd walk into a debate and lose. This badly, not just politically. But morally then, JD Vance did something no one expected. He turned to Zohran and said quietly, you could have used your voice for good, you still can, but not like this, not by breaking what's barely holding together. That sentence pierced deeper than any insult. It wasn't an attack, it was a mirror, and Zohran hated what he saw. As Zohran Mamdani sat silently, wiped out by a storm he never saw coming, another voice rose from the back. A young woman barely 20 stepped up to the floor. Mike, her name was Tara. My brother was murdered last year. She said, her voice trembling, a 17-year-old with dreams. He died because someone who should have been in jail was let go, and your no-cash bail law made it possible. She looked directly at Mamdani. You don't know my pain, but you speak like you do. You hide behind slogans like compassion and justice, but they cost us everything. Zohran looked shaken. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. JD Vance didn't interrupt her. When she finished, he walked slowly over and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Tara, I promise you he mattered. His story matters, and your courage tonight will not be forgotten. People began crying openly in the audience. No one was looking at Mamdani anymore. The room had chosen their leader, and it wasn't the man in the flashy suit with empty promises. It was the quiet fighter who listened across the country. Something began to shift. Phones buzzed, news clips flooded, social media Twitters trending. Lists lit up with Mayor of Mayhem Vance, the voice Zohran exposed in Queens, a diner full of retirees. Watched the replay of JD Vance holding that letter from Isabel and Brooklyn. Parents of public school students shook their heads, realizing the danger their kids would face under Mamdani's plans. And in the Bronx, where crime had spiked, a single mom named Clarissa whispered through tears to her son, that's the man who cares, baby. That's the one who fights for us. Back inside the studio, the moderator looked unsure whether to continue. The debate had transformed into something else, something bigger than politics. Mamdani tried one final move. He stood stiffly. This isn't fair, I'm not on trial. But JD Vance turned slowly. When you ask for power over millions, you should be. And with that single sentence, Mamdani slumped back into his chair. He had nothing left. The final segment was approaching. The moderator was about to close, but JD Vance signaled he had one last thing to say. He walked to the center of the stage. I want to talk to the people watching from home, not the donors, not the pundits, just the Americans. The camera zoomed in, his voice lowered, his eyes full of emotion. I grew up poor. I watched addiction tear through my family. I've seen good people fail because no one believed in them, but I've also seen what happens when we let bad ideas and worse people take the wheel. He looked toward Mamdani. Ideas that sound good on paper, but leave blood on sidewalks. Then came the pause and the words that would replay across every screen in America. This city doesn't need radicalism. It needs healing, and healing starts with truth. People rose to their feet. Not just in the room, but in homes, stores, hospitals, everywhere. For the first time in a long time, the people felt something real, and Zohran Mamdani, he just stared at the floor because he knew. It was over. The moderator, still rattled by the wave of emotion and raw truth flooding the room, gave Zohran Mamdani a final chance to speak before closing. He stood slowly, his voice cracked. I came here to speak for the voiceless, to break the system, to free people. The audience didn't react. They just stared. Yes, I said we should rethink prisons, but not for criminals. A woman near the front stood up. My daughter was raped by someone your campaign defended in court. He was let out without bail. You said he needed therapy. She hasn't smiled since Zohran froze. The words collapsed in his throat. JD Vance stepped in. He wasn't angry, he was broken-hearted. You talk about freeing people, but all I see are the chains you've put on innocent lives. He turned to the audience. This debate wasn't a clash of ideologies. It was a test of who feels your pain. Who cares that moment broke the last piece of Mamdani's facade, and for the first time in his political career, he had no words. One by one, audience members stood up not to protest, but to walk out on Zohran Mamdani. It started with a father of two, then a retired teacher, then a single mother holding a folded flyer that once had Ma's face on it. They all turned and walked toward the exits quietly with tears. He doesn't deserve our ears. One woman whispered, not after what we've heard. JD Vance didn't gloat. He simply nodded in silence, out of respect for their hurt. Even some on Mamdani's campaign team, recognizing the storm their candidate had walked into, began to pack up one. The advisor was seen whispering frantically into her phone, "We have to pull the press release, cancel all post-debate appearances." Mamdani stood alone, a man who had walked into the spotlight expecting to shine, only to have the lights turned against him, and as the stage lights dimmed, JD Vance turned to him with a voice so low, only the mic caught it. "It's never too late to care, but you waited too long outside the studio." Crowds gathered around large TV screens mounted in windows, cafes, and public plazas. People had tears in their eyes, not because of a political victory, but because they finally saw someone fight for them. A grandmother, watching from her apartment in Harlem, wiped her cheek and said, "I haven't felt this scene in 20 years." In a Staten Island precinct, off-duty cops stood in silence. One of them whispered, "That's leadership. That's heart." And back in the studio, JD Vance faced the moderator for his closing words. "This was never about titles, not mayor, not vice president. It's about responsibility. If you want power in this country, you have to earn it with compassion, not chaos." He looked at the lens again, straight into America's soul. Protect your children, respect your laws, and never trade safety for slogans. The crowd erupted, not with noise but with tears. The debate had ended, but the moment it had just begun. Backstage after the debate, Zohran Mamdani sat in a dressing room alone. His jacket hung limp off one shoulder, his hands trembled as he scrolled through his phone, only to find headlines like "Zohran crushed in live debate by JD Vance, the voice of reason, in a city crying for help, mayor of mayhem trend hits." 30 million views. In under 2 hours his staff had vanished.